Thank you for those great introductions. Hello. I'm really happy to be here. I love Seattle so much, and none of my bios actually say the connection that I have here, but I met my wife here for one thing, but also years and years ago I worked at the Girl Scout camp in Carnation. So I want to read to you tonight. I'm not going to spend too long introducing this. I'm going to read to you tonight from a novelette that's in Lost Places that is, in honor of that, my Seattleist story. It's a Girl Scout camp trip gone awry, based on no real people, possibly a real situation, I won't say. I'm going to read you two excerpts from a much longer story. And is there anything else I wanted to say? I also wanted to pick this today because one of my students today had a story with a first-person plural narration, as this story has. So I thought that would be a fun connection since we did that this morning. It's a really cool class. I'm saying that in front of you all, but it's really cool to be here teaching such talented writers. So, this story is called Science Facts. It has an exclamation point in Science Facts, and my editors actually wanted that to be the title of the book. I said, please no. I said, if the book is called Science Facts, it's going to get one star on Amazon within an inch of its life because people are going to buy it that it's a book of science facts. It is not. So we settled on calling the story Science Facts and not the book. And let me just check, is there an echo or are you all good enough with this mic doing what it's doing? Okay. We all made it down the mountain. That's the first thing to tell because otherwise you'll jump to certain conclusions. You'll think you know our story, that we went feral, turned on each other. The prurient details you add will depend on the type of media you devour, on your desire for human triumph or nature's retribution, on your own base assumptions about what must have happened if this doesn't start with telling you, 8 of us went into the woods and 8 came out. So here's what happened. It was 5 a.m. and we were loading the van for the trip. Everyone was some combination of underslept and undercaffeinated and underfed because our dream team counselors got killer whales and Godzilla had promised we'd snack on the road. Then Zilla loaded the last pack into the van and closed the back door and stepped back into a hole and snapped her ankle. We heard it go, sound like a dried twig cracking underfoot, immediately followed by fudge. Godzilla was such a consummate camp professional, she didn't even swear from her cameras in that situation. Commotion ensued. Killer radioed to wake the nurse and the nurse called an ambulance, and then Killer took up 6 up too early 12-year-olds back over to the dining hall where we'd slept the night before, since you don't get a cabin unit when you're only at camp a single night heading out on your trip. The kitchen staff were the only other ones awake, but they were sympathetic to our cause and plated us scrambled eggs and toast and oatmeal from Homer's pot while we waited to hear the fate of our trip, and even let those of us who wanted it have some of their secret stash of the kitchen staff. A couple of us moaned about how much we'd been looking forward to this trip, and the others just looked quietly disappointed. Killer Whale tried to keep everyone distracted. First, we went over plans for the week, and then a creation called Science Facts. How are science facts a game? Asked Lucia. They're just facts. Here's how the game part works, Killa said. Your fact has to be connected to the previous fact in some way, like how in a card game you can match the suit or the number. You get extra points for weird things, and extra points for things I don't know. How can you tell if we're telling the truth? That was Justina. Killa pulled her phone out of her pocket. On our system. I'm allowed to look it up and verify it at any point, but there are a million games where you invent answers, and this is not those games. I'll go first. Female elephants in Mozambique are evolving to have no tusks. I thought evolution was a really long-term thing. It's a response to poaching, I think. If the elephants with tusks are killed, the tuskless ones are the ones around to have babies. Good for them, said Andrea. So the next fact has to do with elephants or tusks? Katie counted off on her fingers, or evolution, or Mozambique, or female animals, or babies, or poaching. Killa nodded in approval, and the game began. Lucia offered up the fact that baby porcupines are called porcupines, and then Justina said baby hedgehogs are called hogs, and Nikki said hedgehogs are immune to some poisonous plants. So they chew them and they lick the saliva onto their spines, and anything that tries to eat them, they can even more super from the spines alone. From there, the game devolved into a semantic argument about poisonous versus toxic until the camp director finally made it to the dining hall to brief us. The sun had started its rise by then. The dining hall's large west-facing windows were still light black. The camp director looked weary and stressed, which was pretty much the space. We were convinced the trip was doomed since Killa wouldn't be allowed to take us on her own, even though she'd been looking forward to it as much as we had. She'd said so. She'd been a trips counselor for 4 years now, and this particular backpacking trip was always the highlight of her summer. The director walked over to the hot drink station and dispensed a cup of carafe coffee into a travel mug, and then made a face like it was left over from the night before, which it probably was, since nobody from the kitchen had come out to change it yet. She took a few sips before walking over to us. Thanks for your patience, girls. Godzilla made it to the hospital. She's waiting on x-rays, but they think it's a clean wreck. Katie and Andrea, who had been on last year's canoe camping trip with Zilla, made relieved sounds. And I have good news for you, she continued. We found someone else to go in her place, so the trip can still happen. Killa tried to catch her eye, clearly surprised. She looked away. There is no dedicated drama program this week, so Diva was scheduled as a third counselor on junior arts and crafts. She said she'd be willing to go. Crap, Killa said. We looked at her, and she tried to save herself. I meant crepuscular. That means related to Twilight. But I like Twilight, so I use it to mean great. Crepuscular, said Justina with enthusiasm. The camp director sipped her coffee, winced, and continued. Godzilla said Diva could use her gear, so she's down at the van right now repacking Zilla's pack with her own clothes. You should be able to leave soon. Crepuscular, Katie and Andrea said. Andrea might have said crapuscular, which was closer to Killa's opinion. She turned to us. Why don't you all use the bathroom one more time before we hit the road? You have my special permission to use the indoor instead of the outhouse. The indoor was usually reserved for counselors. We headed toward the foyer, and Killa turned to her boss. She wasn't quiet. You couldn't find anyone else. She shook her head. I'm sorry, I know you two don't get along. Has she ever camped a night in her life? She chose the nickname Diva. She runs the drama tent. Killa could go on. Diva had only applied to work there because she was between apartments. She didn't like kids. She was a clean freak who avoided touching the costumes in her own drama tent. She disappeared at the end of every week when it was time to clean. Saying any of that also served as an indictment of the director for hiring her, though, so Killa stopped. Okay, so you want me to cancel the trip? Do you want to tell those girls? It's Diva or nothing. No trip, disappointment city. And who knows if their parents are around to take them back or went away themselves. Not to mention we can't afford refunds on an entire program. This is the minimum damage option. Please say you can deal. A week with the counselor she hated most, a week managing someone who probably needed more maintenance than any of the campers, or no trip. And knowing she was the one who had disappointed us, she sighed, I can deal. That's the point where I'm going to skip ahead. They head out to the place that they're going to be camping. They play lots of name games to try to get people to actually remember their names. They get lost in the woods a little bit, and I'm going to jump to their first night's campfire. After dinner, we sang songs around the fire. We could have cooked over our little gas burner, and it was warm enough that the fire was superfluous, but Killa liked to sing around a fire the first night as a bonding thing. Don't think about how many nights you're away from your family, or the darkness, or anything it contains. We were at the age where everyone at school was telling us what was cool and who was cool, and some of us were maybe starting to believe it. But right now, for a few more nights or a few more minutes, we sang earnestly. Even Megan sang along, though she shook her head when it was her turn to pick a song. This is what Killuel loved most about leading these trips. This and the views. This and the chance to teach kids it was possible to step away from their devices for a minute. To teach us to look up and look around, to be somewhere and just be. All of which was why she was so pissed off when she looked over to see that Diva had her phone by her thigh, typing with one thumb, her neck craned at an unsubtle angle. "Hey, Diva," she said, "do you want to lead a song?" The other counselor startled and slipped her phone back into her jacket pocket. The illuminated screen shone through. I don't really sing, but I can tell a story. Do you girls want a story?" "Is it scary?" asked Katie. Diva grinned. "You can tell me after you hear it." Killa opened her mouth to say no scary stories on the first night, but there wasn't a good way to say it in front of the girls. It was another thing her usual trips partner, Godzilla, knew implicitly. Anyway, we had all reoriented ourselves toward Diva, with looks ranging from excitement to trepidation on our faces. "Once upon a time," Diva started, and Killer Whale remembered that Diva was the drama counselor for a reason. She'd shifted into a narrator's voice. What was her background again? Local theater troupe, and she'd been up to Vancouver to act in a couple of TV series, bit parts. But even Killer Whale had to admit she wasn't bad. Once upon a time, a beautiful young actor got invited to spend the summer working with kids at a scouting camp. She was excited about it. A chance to live in a cabin in the woods, rustic but not without basic amenities. A chance to impart a love of acting to the campers. She took the time to research activities for kids, and she cataloged and disinfected every item in the costume tent because she wanted to do a good job. She had 3 mostly good weeks doing all the things she was supposed to do, and then something unusual happened. Another counselor injured herself, someone whose job was to take advanced campers backpacking, and the actor was told she was needed on the trip. She asked if there were any other options. She wasn't really much for camping, though she'd done it a few times as a kid. But her boss called this other duties as assigned and made it clear it was non-negotiable. So she went, she hiked and she camped and she ate bad tacos over a fire. She did her best, even though the campers all knew more about backpacking than she did. She made up for it by telling them stories. "Are you telling us what's happening right now?" interrupted Lucia. "This isn't a story." "Shh," said Diva. "This is where it changes." At the end of the trip, the group made their way back toward the parking lot where they left the van. They emerged from the woods at the spot where they'd gone in, but for a second they thought they must have made a wrong turn. The parking lot had become overgrown in the week they'd been gone, the gravel erupting with young conifers and deer ferns and bushes heavy with ripe salmon berries in red and orange and gold. "Maybe we took a wrong turn," said the actor. "This is definitely the right place," said the other counselor. Who thought she was always right? I'm never wrong." "Somebody is wrong," said the most loudmouth camper. "Hey," said Lucia, "is that supposed to be me?" "Shh," said Diva, "names have been changed to protect the innocent." Where was I? A young forest had grown up where the parking lot should have been. The ranger station had a hole in the roof with a cedar tree growing through it, and it looked like one of those old barns by the side of the highway that nobody has kept up, so it kind of falls in on itself. Was the van still there? Katie's voice was only a whisper. It was. The insufferable counselor was correct that they were in the right place, but the van was barely recognizable and surrounded by baby trees. Its tires had rotted away, so it was standing on 4 rusted rims. It had moss growing on top of it and broken windows, and mice had made nests in the seat upholstery. How did they know it was their van? At first they didn't, but when they opened the back door, there was a blue plastic cooler right where they had left their lunch cooler the week before. Plastic takes ages to decay. Also, the key fit, said Andrea. They opened the trunk, so the key must have fit. Good point, said Diva. What do you think they did next? Check their phones. If they turned off their phones like they were supposed to, or had extra batteries or solar power, maybe they still had battery. Oh yes, they tried that. Nobody answered, and they didn't have any signal at all. They should go into the ranger station. Yes, that's what they did next. The actor went in because she didn't want the campers to get injured if the rest of the roof fell in. And do you know what she found? No, nobody did. Megan looked ready to cry. The building didn't even have a door anymore. The actor walked in. On the wall inside, she found a rain-ruined poster that read, "Have you seen these people?" It had torn, so she couldn't see who was on it. There was a rain-rotted wooden desk, and on it was a national parks calendar. But it said July 2044, which made no sense to her. It must have been a joke calendar. Except when she went outside, she found one of those bulletin boards that stand at the start of trails, and on it was another "Have you seen these people?" poster, but this one was laminated, and the picture on the poster was a picture of her in her campers. We didn't take a picture. It's not us. We didn't take a picture. Maybe it was Photoshop or our parents gave our pictures. This isn't about us, obviously, but it is. You heard her. Our van, 20 years passed. No, it didn't, said Katie. More than 20 years passed. 2044 was what was on the calendar, but the calendar was obviously from the last month when the station was still in use and had a roof and everything. Then there was more time after it wasn't kept up anymore. That was when they let the roof rot and fall in. We've been missing way longer. Not we, Killer Whale said sharply. That wasn't a story about us, remember? Tell them, Diva. No, of course not. It's just a story. I want to call my mom. Better not to. What if she doesn't answer because time passes differently here and it's already been 100 years, Lucia said in a helpful tone. Half the girls looked ready to cry. Killer Whale glared at Diva, who looked delighted. Show them, Killa said. Show them what? Take out your phone and show them the date. What phone? Asked Diva. Killer Whale summoned her most lethal glare. Diva did as she was told, then responded to an incoming message before putting away the phone. See, it still sends. You can ask me to show you my phone anytime. And I bet Killa has a solar battery she'll let me use to make sure my phone doesn't run out of charge, so we can keep checking it all week. She looked pleased with her generosity. Killa looked murderous. Satisfied it was just a scary story. It wasn't much of a story, said Nikki. Everyone looked over. Was it the first time Nikki had spoken voluntarily on the whole trip? It might have been. That isn't an ending, it's a plot twist. That's where the story begins. A good story would go on from there to tell us what they all did next. Okay, fine, said Diva. What did they do next? Nikki folded her arms across her chest. It's your story, not mine. You figure it out. It's not even like one of those urban legends where the helpful stranger has some identifying feature, exactly like the murderers, or the woman places the final puzzle piece and realizes it's her house with somebody staring in through the window. You know in those stories what happens next is the murderer murders her. If that wasn't going to happen, you'd have to tell the rest of the story, since that's the obvious conclusion your imagination built in. As it is, you just said all that to scare us, which is not a nice thing to do to a bunch of kids who are supposed to be looking out. Everyone looked at Nikki like she'd grown a second head. What? I read. And we're all glad you do, said Killer Whale. That's a really good point. Now that we've listened to Diva's disturbing and entirely fictional story, how about one more song and then we head to bed? We have a long day tomorrow. Nikki, you can choose a song. Nikki chose the song the counselors usually sang to serenade the campers at the campfire. Looked at Killer Whale and Diva expectantly. Killer Whale in turn looked at Diva to make sure she understood she was expected to join in. She did. Killer Whale waited until we had all brushed our teeth and settled into our tents before climbing into the tent she and Diva were sharing. Diva lay in her sleeping bag with her eyes closed, like Killer hadn't seen the screen lighting up the tent 1 second before she unzipped it. Not worth fighting the same battle again. She chose a different one. What happens at the end of your story? Diva shrugged. I haven't figured it out yet. It's something I think about every time someone makes me go camping, ever since I was a kid. Time flows differently to a forest, so why wouldn't time flow differently in a forest? Why tell these poor kids a story like that? Are you kidding? They loved it. If anyone gets scared tonight, you're the one comforting them. Except, of course, she wasn't. When Killer Whale heard crying in the middle of the night, she reached over to shake Diva, but Diva didn't stir. And really, who would want to be comforted by her? None of these girls. Killa sighed and went to help Katie, who was, not surprisingly, having a nightmare about the story Diva had told. I'm going to stop there. There are no stories.
Tanisha, do you want to start?
This is Tanisha. Yeah, you guys should introduce yourselves, and I'm going to turn this.
I'm Max. I'm Tanisha. We're part of the Clarion West 2024 class. Really happy to be here today.
We're really happy you're here. You can applaud now.
We have a list of questions sourced from our class, but anyone in the audience is always free to raise their hand and submit a question. If the questions are bad, it's the fault of our lab. Tanisha, do you want to start?
Yeah. So the first question is, what is
The worst writing advice I've ever received. Oh, that's really hard because I immediately wipe all the bad advice from my memory. But like anything that says this is the rule, if someone says like this is a writing rule, then the first thing you do is figure out why they said that and then how you can break it. And the answer is usually there are ways to break it if it's something worth doing.
Okay, I'm gonna skip it around the list. You were a professional musician for a while. You talked to us in class about the ways that it's influenced your writing. This question asks if you've seen similarities or differences kind of in the way that the publishing industry works versus the way that the music industry works.
Ooh, that's a fun one. All right, so the interesting thing there is that most of my experience all of my experience in music is indie music, and a lot of my experience in publishing is like my novels have been published by the big 5 publishers, which is very cool. So like I think the similarities might be closer to like my collections come from Small Beer Press, which is a small indie press, wonderful, taking a break right now, sadly. But there's a lot of similarities there in terms of, budgets, in terms of authors like being expected to like step up and do some of the work. And, like they're not necessarily going to send you out on tour. They're not necessarily going to have the biggest promotion budget in the world. But what makes up for it is they have great connections in these stores, and they feed in, like those ecosystems are great. So it's a little more DIY on that side, and I haven't had the experience of the giant music publishers. I actually think that authors have it like even at the bottom of the pecking order in fiction. Authors and even with the big 5, like authors have it slightly better than musicians, and then at a similar level like the giant music companies, in terms of attention, in terms of not actually being expected to like pay them back. I know a lot more musicians who are hawking stuff to stay in it than writers, even though writers are dating. You're welcome. Good question.
Next, you didn't tell me you were skipping around. You talked about, you mentioned in our process, you played to resonance between the beginning and the end of the story. Can you talk a little bit about the different kinds of resonance?
Different kinds of resonance. Sometimes that has to do, a lot of it has to do with the promises made at the beginning of a story. What promises a story is giving me as a reader, and which ones they fulfill. And some of it is purely down to language. So at the end, what I was saying in class today is that like at the end of a story, I look for, like there's literally a sound I hear when the story has nailed the ending. Like everything seems to be in the same key and just resonating together, and it makes me want to go right back to the beginning sometimes and look at the beginning again and see like where that started. Sometimes you forget what was right at the beginning, but even when I've forgotten what was right at the beginning, you can, when you get to the end even of a good story, you instinctively know it nailed the ending, and it's even if you don't remember what was at the beginning, it's because there's this like low hum that's gone beneath the whole story that was sort of feeding your bones. That's a weird description, but hopefully I see some people nodding, so they know that sometimes a story feeds your bones. Good job. All right.
We scared our classmates because someone is adding questions right now. This is a topical one. Many of your stories feature characters telling their own stories. Often speak the main plot, science facts, religious dread, figures in their lives. It's the same collection. What draws you to this belief it offers the narrative?
I love sort of nested stories because, I mean, everything that I do, music, the fiction, the storytelling is the base, right? For both of those things, storytelling is the base. Other people have other things that they add in their playwriting and poetry. It's all storytelling, and storytelling is the, along with song, which again I think is storytelling. Those are the basics of human existence. Like that is what we do. We tell each other stories. We tell baby stories. We sing baby songs. And so I like it when characters tell stories, because telling stories is how we figure out the world. And so I like to put that into the characters' voices too, because they are, in a science fiction or fantasy or horror story, people are often trying to figure out the world. And so letting them have some of those ways of sort of poking at it serves the purpose. Sometimes it serves the purpose of giving multiple points of view on the same thing. And sometimes it's just because they're trying to figure a thing out, and the way of applying those alternate views to the reader. Sometimes it's just fun. But yeah, I think people tell each other stories, and people tell themselves stories. Two Truths and a Lie is people telling themselves, is one person telling herself stories, essentially. And then some other people telling stories too. Yeah, I think that would be where I would go with that answer. But I just think that's tremendous fun, like putting stories in there for other people to tell. And this one is full. There's a whole bunch more in Science Facts. Diva keeps telling worse and worse stories to her poor campers.
You use a lot of non-linear narrative structures in your stories. What draws you to that?
A lot of times there's an idea that comes to me, and it doesn't seem like it seems like the best way to tell it is not straight through, which is the most basic version of that. But on a deeper level, sometimes you get bored telling stories that are just doing the thing it says on the tin, beginning, middle, end, there's a certain point where you can do that when you need to, and then it becomes sort of fun if you get an idea and you're like, well, how could a lunchbox be a story? Like, what is the inherent storyness of lunchbox? This is dangerous for movies. I don't know. But when what is the thing that would be a story about this thing that I want to do? What is the storyness of it, and what would that look like as a structure? It has to justify itself to me. Why would I change it up at that point? And the answer is because this thing and this thing are inextricably linked, and I need to, in order to tell the one, I need to figure out how to do the other. And that's a lot of fun too, because that's when you level up as a writer, when you try to do these ridiculous things that you don't know how to do yet. Nisi knows what I'm talking about. so I did that interview in November from a castle in Spain, and a very bad line, and I don't remember any of the questions, and I haven't read my issue yet, so I don't know what I answered. But the question is to talk a little about writing about music. And I probably had to talk my way into this, and I think that was much longer than whatever was accepted there. I like the challenge of seeing how to turn music into prose, because they say you can't. And the way that I approach it is, if you do, first of all, putting lyrics into prose often just looks like doggerel, because lyrics often rhyme, and especially if you're trying to talk about a song that moves people, you run this risk as you describe it too much of people saying, I don't buy it, it wouldn't have moved me, and therefore I why that this, song could have transformed it. And so my trick is you don't put the lyrics in there for starters. And then also, instead of describing, and I'm assuming this is probably what you're talking about, instead of describing the music the way like a music journalist would, like describing what it sounds like is what a music journalist's job is. I see my job in prose as getting the feel across, the reason that the song moves someone, the reason that this band is like changing people's lives and is worth writing a novel about. And to do that, what I do is I write either the feel of how it feels to be in that song, in that band, in that moment. So the physical aspect of actually playing the song, the muscularity of it, the sweat, the connection between the musicians, or how it feels to be in the audience in that moment, in that connect when a song hits you. And like anyone who loves music knows that moment when a song hits you, right? When a song arrives at you in the moment that you need it most. And when you're in the room, like when it's happening and there's a connection, you look over at the other person, like you hear that too, like, oh my God, they're playing, yeah. So if you can infuse those things into the story, that's where like the music comes across, even like, and people will impose what they think the band sounds like, and they'll put their own favorite band in there. So the fun thing about A Song for a New Day, which is my music novel, is that when people came to me and afterward and said, and I know exactly what that band sounds like. That band, like variously to different people, they said, I know what that band sounds like. It sounds like the Indigo Girls. I know what that band sounds like. It sounds like Joan Jett. I know what that band sounds like. It sounds like Evanescence. Like whatever it was that they thought was music that moved them was what they, and that's way better than if I had said it sounds like, because that's good. Like if people don't like the Indigo Girls, then they're gonna say, well, why did that band do that? So that's I think that was what you were saying. All right. The question was about the project. September, the first Tuesday in September, I have a book coming out from Tor.com called Haunt Sweet Home. It's the longest a novella can possibly be without being a novel. It's 39,900 words. It is the story of someone who goes to work for a TV production on a reality show that's a combination of fixer-upper and paranormal show. So the idea is that during the day the people who apply have just bought old houses, and during the day, like the house is fixed up, and then they have to live in it at night, and to talk about the hauntings that have happened there. And at the beginning, it was all like, oh, this house has great bones, is what the host always says. But it was really cheesy, and they would do this thing where they were, oh my gosh, there are bones in the wall, dun dun dun, and they cut to commercial, and they'd come back, and it would turn out it was squirrel bones or whatever, like a snake had died in the wall. And then they realized they were losing ratings, and so they hired a night crew to haunt the people who were living in the house. And so this girl goes to work, and she finds out that she's on the night crew, and because she's the production assistant, the lowest possible person in the company, her job is all the really crappy stuff where you have to like stay up all night and haunt things. And then of course there's a real haunt. So that's called Haunt Sweet Home, and it's coming in September. My sister called it cozy horror, and because it's not scary, it's just like haunting, like it's about people. So yeah, thank you for asking that, and go ahead. So the question is whether I could see fiction writers going to a sort of like paid newsletter model, like putting out their stories. I don't see that. I mean, I think some people are already doing it. And I know a lot of fiction writers who have like craft newsletters that they're doing, which I think are fantastic. To me, I think it's a question of audience and whether you can build your audience, whether you can sustain an audience on your own like that. The great thing about magazines is, you know, you get people who you are new to them. And then maybe they'll come aboard with your thing. So I think like, I think there are already people successfully doing that. And I just blinked on every single person who's doing that. But yeah, I think you can do that, but I don't know that I can see it replacing anything. And I love the magazine, so I would, I selfishly don't want to see that happen. Okay, that story, it's called And Then There Were in -1. And it looks like And Then There Were None, but it's got like the math equation in it. And it's a convention of Sarah Pinskers at who have discovered the multiverse and have decided to just all meet each other on a tiny island. Because I mean, what would you do if you met yourself? Find out. Or at least that's apparently what all the Sarah Pinskers would do. It came about from a couple of things. One of which was I found this. There's not Fisher Price, the other thing. There's an old book that it had Grover in it, I think, and it was my book of me, and I had written in it when I was like 6 or 7 years old. And it's like, how tall are you? How many books have you read? Where have you lived? And then one of them is, what do you want to be when you grow up? And it had all these options to circle, and I had circled like a ton of them, and it was stuff like some of them were like astronaut, and some of them were, it already said president. And it said rabbi, which is surprising, and it said president's dog trainer, very specific. That was my, like, I added that. It said dog trainer, and I added the president's dog trainer because I had been to Lyndon Baines Ranch when we lived in San Antonio, and I thought it would be great to be his dog trainer. He was long dead by then, but nonetheless. And horse trainer and jock, even though I was too tall already, and all these things. And I was like, oh, so all these other me's went off to do that is what I sort of decided at that moment. And then also the title came to me, and it was the end of like, what does, and then there were N-1 mean instead of none. Well, there's an N of us, and so what happens to make there -1? One of them must have died. And I was like, wouldn't it be cool to have a mystery where every single person is who is a potential murderer is the same person, and then also what would happen if every victim is also the same person? That should be confusing. Can you make it happen? And like, can you make it happen is always the thing that starts going in my brain. And the first version was not Sarah Pinskers, is the other thing. I wrote it with another character, and it was flat. It was just like, because that character was already someone I had made up, and all the ones that I made up, like, they just didn't come off the page. And then I was like, oh no, I know what I have to do, and I don't like it at all. And it was torture. I was like, it was a lot of fun to write it and like see the variations of me and the fun little Easter eggs that I could put in there, like the Parable of the Trickster being a book that was in someone's backpack, and like all these you know, things that didn't exist in our world that I could insert in there that people had brought in at show and tell. And so there were like fun little games I could play in that, but yeah, it was sort of fun and terrible, and I knew it was the right thing, even though it would invite a lot of weird criticism and a lot of attention of a weird sort. Yeah, I mean, there's a thing that happened when you do a self-insert story that like people assume that it is the real you. And like I put in something in there, like when she goes to the bar, like the bar is already out of the stout. Because all of us had already been there and had a stout, but it's okay because it was still some whiskey. But like, so I was like, at least everyone will know what to order me when they like if we have a drink at the bar together. But yeah, I don't know. Yeah, there were people who assumed there were things in there that were the real me. That like I'm not the main character. I'm not the person who died. I'm not the person who. Yeah,
but you don't show up.
Right, the murder weapon, and I am, so secretly I am there. I did write myself a bit part. But I don't even have a line.
We have to find it.
You can find me. I'll answer if anyone ever finds me. I'll say yes, that's me. But I was there, but it had nothing to do with any of the stuff.
So did you, or what is the biggest difference other than like that you found between like the process?
Novels take long. I mean, it's really, really easy to drown in the endless middle of a novel. Is the difference. With a story, you can usually see the whole thing. Like you can visualize where the ending is. You can sometimes finish a draft in a day, as you all have to do. They have to do this five times in 5 weeks. They have to turn in a new story every week, which is impressive. And yet they're here instead of doing their reading or their writing, because while they're writing, they also have to read 4 stories every night. So just so you know what they're going through, and they're still sitting here happily. But yeah, the difference is the sort of the churn of the middle and the having to braid other threads in there so that it's not. Yeah, there's a little more complexity to a novel usually. You can have I mean, short stories can be plenty complex, but I still feel like you can hold them in your hand. A novel's more like Jell-O. You can hold it in your hand, but it's not going to be pretty.
This is a question I also have. Can you explain the cover of Lost Places?
Oh, I can explain the cover. Oh, yeah, that cover. All right. So the cover of Lost Places is, in fact, I'm gonna get the date wrong, but this is an aerial view. It's I believe a 17th century print of the first, this is like a game of broken telephone. It was someone went up in a balloon over England and came back down and wrote 300 pages describing what he had seen. And the book also included 3 color prints, which were his words as interpreted by an artist who he gave those words to. So broken telephone, because the artist had not been up in the balloon and was taking this man's description of a balloon trip that had never, like no one had been on before. And so what we get is this weird concentric, the things that kind of look mushroomy on this cover are trees, and it's just a field in England from a heirloom, which I think is that thing in the center, which kind of looks like it's been colored in. It's weird, but it's like 16th or 17th century.
What made you pick that? Or did your
Gavin and Kelly picked it. Yeah, the publishers picked it, and I don't know why. but I like it. Like it definitely looks like a weird place, and like we fought a lot of, like I said, Science Facts was a daring choice that I was not bold enough to make. And Lost Places came after we threw lots and lots of titles out there. So yeah, I think it's and Lost Places felt like it invoked a lot of these stories. Like there's a lot of the stories within stories, but there's also a lot of like weird overgrowth. And one of the fun things I got to do for the release of this book was actually, there was a baker who was working in Baltimore who did a lot of like floral stuff, and it was always kind of pretty, but also a little wild. Like she was always like using all kinds of different edible flowers. And I went to her and I was like, okay, so I didn't do like book cover. I don't want book cover. But like, could you give me a book that looks like it was left out in the forest for like a couple of weeks, and like a cake that looks like it was left out in the forest and just gone to seed, like things have grown over it. And I got the coolest cake. She put mushrooms on the cake, like real mushrooms, and it just had like all this growth. It had like a little pond that was lemon curd, and then like everything was like, I'm trying to picture the best cake I've ever eaten. But yeah, like kind of like giving an artist like a brief that's just like, I want it to look like it died. Was a lot of fun. Inspiration and all. Sure. The question is about where open hearts do gather, and the inspiration behind that story and how I structured it. That is a story that is told as if it were an online forum dissecting lyrics. That story came about because I was looking up the lyrics of a traditional song. Traditional songs are the ones that, like, you don't know who wrote it anymore. It's been around for a few hundred years. And I was looking it up on Genius, which usually has the correct lyrics, but also has annotations along the side that people can send in. And someone had annotated this traditional song and said, like, this verse is about an acid trip, because like there's a popular version that like the Grateful Dead covered it, and they're like, this is about an acid trip. I was like, I don't think it is. And then I started looking for like things that were wrong. Like I was thinking about like other lyrics that people would get wrong, and I was looking around the site, and there were all these like very wrong interpretations of lyrics, and I was thinking about the people who would like fight over those things on a lyrics website. And so then I had an idea for a long time that was like, what if murder ballad but song? And I was like, oh, I could use that finally. And then I was like, so how do you do this? And I was like, I think I have to write a traditional ballad. And then I have to, so that they can interpret it, so people can misinterpret the lyrics of that song. And so it has to, like, people have to be able to buy it as a song. And then people also have to be able to, and it has to have enough like fuzziness to have interpretations that people can fight over. And then also there has to be a murder in it. And it has to be questionable. And so the whole thing is structured as like these, we had to do it as footnotes because there wasn't a way to do it as a full website. But so it's basically just all footnotes on every single verse and stanza of this Old English ballad, which I also then like gave it a child ballad number, because the child ballads are a famous collection of old songs and include like multiple variants on the lyrics, so I could include multiple variants from these lyrics too. And so it's got like 15 verses and then like 100-ish notes on them, and within that there's a murder, and then a whole story that takes place as the people are doing their interpretation, like they're interpreting, but they're also sort of getting to know each other, and there's another like mystery within there. And then I actually wrote the song because I wanted to play right. So my greatest joy with that song, with that story, is actually that it went up on Candy Magazine, which means it was online, which meant that I could make, it's got a section in it that's sort of like, here are some links to famous versions of this song. And I said, here's the Decemberist version, here's the Johnny Cash version, here's the White Stripes version, you know, and they're all dead links, except that one is a live link that goes to YouTube. And and I did a quick version into my computer. It's not a professional recording. But I put it up and I said, who knows who recorded this? And the great thing is every single comment on the YouTube version, it is someone like talking about their favorite version as if it exists. And it's been going on for like 3 years now, like no one has broken. Like every so don't break. If you want, you can add your favorite version. Maybe I was like, oh no, that's okay. John Barney's version. Oh, but have you heard the like Miley Cyrus did it okay? And it's so cool. Like no one has broken it. There isn't even anyone like trying to sell, you know, Viagra. It's just pristine. Oh, I don't. So the question is, what's the deepest nesting of stories that I've ever done? It's probably that. That one has the song, then it has the website. And it has the people discussing the song, and then it has the mystery within there. And within that, there's one guy who's looking at, who's talking about someone else's website that had, like there had been a scholar like 20 years before who had done a deep dive on the song, including like going to England to try to figure out where that song actually took place. And so there's one guy who's like, yeah, this one scholar, and here's what he said. And then he goes, the person who's talking in the now of the story goes to track down what happened to that guy. So he's saying what happened to the other scholar who's saying what happened in the story. And then someone else commented, one of the other commenters is asking a question about, hey, have you seen that guy recently? So that's probably another layer of that. So that might be, is that, oh, that's 7? 7. I wasn't counting, so thank you, Chris. Sorry, well, also, it's not quantity. I mean, you could fight that because it's not quantity, it's quality, but he's not a fighter.
Well, unless there are any other questions, thank you, and thank you for.